All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Appreciate you guys showing up. This is the wireless world of the Internet of Things. I'm JP Dunning, a.k.a. Ronin. This is DerbyCon. If you are unaware that you're at DerbyCon, then you're at the right place. The first thing I want to say to everyone here is you guys should leave immediately and go over to the Hackers for Charity auction, which is taking place at 5 o'clock today. This will be videoed and shown later on, so you can watch this later on, but you can't participate in the auction over there for things like a KGB challenge coin, the Homeland Security old colored rainbow books. There's lots of really awesome stuff, so I would be very happy if you would leave my talk right now to go over there, but if you're going to stick around, that's okay. If you haven't been over to the vendor area at all, I volunteer there. A lot of us here in the community are big fans of Hackers for Charity, so try to check them out, and that's all I'll say about that. So I feel like I'm one of the few speakers that's like, please leave my talk. But if you do, I won't feel bad. It's only going on from 5 till around 5:30, and it is live auction. So once things are done, they are done for good. All right, well, thanks for staying. No turnaround time at all for that. As I said, I'm JP. I am a security consultant at Foundstone. I've worked on several projects throughout the years. You might know me from doing the Glitch, little hardware embedded device, Katana, multi-boot USB, a Vera NG if you've seen me, with the big Nerf gun. If you're like, oh, I recognize that guy kind of. It's more about the prop that I have than the face that gets seen with that, but I have a big giant Nerf gun that I mount all my fun wireless equipment on that I call Vera. A few Bluetooth tools, that's kind of how I got my start in the field, was playing around with Bluetooth, so a few of these are in some of the distros, Bluetooth, Blue Ranger, and Cavity Search, because it's tooth. And there's my handle up there, or my Twitter. So enough about that. I'm not a real big buzzword person. I find that things get lost a lot of times when you use buzzwords. So my initial submission was going to be wirelessly synergizing the Internet of Things with the next-gen cloud-based software-as-a-service solutions. But this isn't that kind of con. So if you see this title at another more professional-grade con at some point, more corporate-y based one, it's the exact same talk. I just had to appease the crowd a little more. So what is the Internet of Things? It's a word, a buzz phrase that we've probably been hearing about the last year or so, but it's not really a new concept. So the idea is to network all the devices in your home, and as we're going to see in the future, things you never thought should be networked will be. A lot of this stuff, I'm going to give you some examples later on, but things like sensors that nowadays you wouldn't necessarily need to use, in 5 years will be standard install on every home. So this is not a new concept. This is something that we all saw the Jetsons and Star Trek and science fiction movies years ago, that by this time, of course, they predicted stuff that we'd be way beyond. Our flying cars were like 1999 whenever the Jetsons actually took place. So we're a little behind. But it's the home automation is kind of the term we think of. That's an older one, but it's really having all your devices able to be centrally managed in some way. It's dynamic, so you can add and remove things, so it's not like you buy one solution, set it up, and it's that way forever. You have to buy another one here, there, and the other. They're all supposed to mesh together in some form. We have our primary control, like a phone or computer, and it's obviously controlled sometimes over those series of tubes we're also familiar with. And the devices, again, can be pretty much anything. Anything that takes power that you might want to turn on and off, that's a candidate for becoming an Internet of Things device. So everything that we normally would buy in a store today that's electronics, in the next 5-10 years will have a little addition on there that somehow makes it networked, either connectable from the Internet or somehow locally managed. And I think the big market right now is targeting home automation, just to make your life a little more convenient, but I'm sure that's going to expand more in corporations and things like that in the future. So who are the players in this game of the Internet of Things? This is, by the way, apparently an actual movie poster for a real movie that I would never, ever, ever want to go see. I was like, what? No, somebody must have. Oh my gosh, it's actually an own movie. So the players in this game are any manufacturer. Sometimes we have technologies that pop up, let's say like curved TVs. Will it take off? Won't it take off? We don't really know. Maybe not all TV manufacturers are in on the game yet, but it's kind of a little niche market. This is not a niche market. It's also not a specific, thing like a TV. It's much broader scoped. So all the players, we have some big players right now who are really pushing the technologies to say we want this sort of integration. Some of the front runners, but really over the next few years, anybody who manufactures and resells electronics will be concerned about, security in the realm of the Internet of Things. So here's some examples of some things. This talk is not focusing on specific brands or models or anything like that. These are just examples. I'm not saying they are specifically affected by any of the wireless security issues I'm going to talk about later on today. They're just some examples of things that you can buy off the shelf or online now that are, would be considered an Internet of Things device. And I'm sure soon we're going to actually see stamps or something on these devices saying like IoT approved, like part of the Internet of Things, but we're not quite there yet. So some devices you see up here, some of them might seem a little more obvious. We think of like cameras. We're really used to CCTVs, right? That concept's been around since the camera was invented. Some things you might think of like, well, that makes sense, turning off and on power switches, your thermostat. I don't have the mouse up here to show you over there, but you can kind of guess what some of those things are. There's a few sensors, kind of in the middle. The one with the little ring in the middle is it's a light sensor to see if the light is on or off outside. Maybe detect if it's night or day. There's a little key fob in there, like what you would have for your car. So that's an easy one, not conceptually changing, but the key fob, 20 years ago was a weird concept. And now every car comes with it. You're used to either walking up in your car, unlocking, or hitting a little button, but it detects sort of your local presence. This is just making it at a much more massive scale. Some things that you might not have thought of that are kind of, the right reason I say everything is integrating. A crock pot. Why would you want your crock pot controlled by your cell phone? Well, maybe you want to turn it off, turn it on, make sure that it's not on when you're leaving for the weekend, or change the temperature. Maybe whatever you're cooking needs this temperature for 3 hours. You can automate that, or you can manually interact with it, no matter where you are. You've got one that's kind of hard to tell is the doggy door. The one that's kind of on your left that looks kind of like a triangle. That's actually a dog door. So you could use a sensor to say something walked up, look it through the camera, see it's your dog, unlock the doggy door, let the dog in, and avoid raccoons wandering around your kitchen. So that's one that, we didn't normally think of, but it's kind of the way things are going is to, even these things that weren't normally powered before, now using this remote control, the ability to remote control them has made them super convenient, and again, many, many more things. Oh. So the Internet of Things, the Internet portion is not our Internet. It's not the Internet we typically think of. It actually just means the interconnectivity between these devices. And some of them talk directly to each other, some of them talk to a controller. I'll get to that in a second. But these are the general technologies that are being used to incorporate all these different devices as Internet of Things devices. And we're going to focus today, obviously, on the wireless. A few of these technologies you know about, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Some of them you might be less familiar with, like Zigbee and Z-Wave. We have our wired side, obviously. Some of them are still connecting out through a wired Internet. We've got serial. That seems very old school to us who have used serial parallel cables. That kind of wired connection still exists for convenience and backwards compatibility. A lot of the newer things that are coming out will be able to make electronics that we currently have in our home, modify them. You can DIY modify them to kind of bring them on board, like by adding a power switch or something on there, something that anybody can do at home. So this is looking at, peripherals. We're used to seeing keyboards, to actually interact with these devices, and this will come up in the reasons of security. A lot of them are very small. They're embedded. They're not a computer or a cell phone that you're going to be interacting with through a touch screen or keyboard. A lot of them are just going to be, might have a push button on there at best. That's the only way, unless you pull out the power, that you can interact with them, which made some of the wireless stuff that we're used to using a little more difficult. And where it goes. And I've got a little more descriptions later on, but you've got these devices are normally, for the time being, connecting somehow to your home router, your home access point, then going out to the Internet somehow in some cases. So we've got your home local area network. You've got internal servers that are locally controlling them in some way. You've got your method of control, which is a smartphone, a tablet, a computer, whatever, and that's how you interact with them. And then they're going out to another buzzword, the cloud or a server or something out there on the internet that's actually, managing it, logging things, and that's, controlled or managed by some sort of third party. So a little more details about what I just talked about. Your individual interaction could be if I have a light bulb and my phone is directly connecting to the light bulb without going through any sort of third party, without hopping through a router or, any other, central control in my home. I can talk to that light bulb, disconnect, talk to that light bulb, disconnect. And some of them are in the market today, some of them that you've seen. Again, I'm going to stay away from talking about specific brands, but going into, your local hardware or your local electronics store, you're going to find out what I'm talking about. More commonly now, you see a local controller. So you buy all the little devices that you want. There's a box that sits in the corner somewhere in your home. And that box is actually what's going to be directly talking to all the devices around. So your phone, in this case, that box will be on your local area. Your phone connects to that box and says, hey, I want it to dim all the lights in the room over here. Turn off all the bedroom lights. You hit the button. You've already said these 3 lights are in the bedroom. Bedroom lights are off, or they dim, or turn on, or what have you. And then you have the cloud, or the internet-based solution, where you're going over the internet through some sort of web app, and it's being remotely managed. So you're sending a request out to some server, and then the server is actually sending it back to your local hub, the local controller, and then that's pivoting it out. So it's, a little bit more around. Companies want to move to this because it's a pay-by-month solution for a lot of times, just like you might have an alarm company at home. It's very, very similar scale, and some of the alarm companies are actually trying to integrate this. So you have a service-based solution that's going to be somehow managed by them. They can help monitor your home in some way, and you can also monitor it, a couple of bucks a month, whatever scale they have. So a lot of companies are seeing this bottom method as, their big money maker. They're mostly going that way. That's another entire security, issue. We're going to really focus on wireless, but I know there's been a few other Internet of Things talks here, and I know like DEF CON had an entire track of them. But really, these are some different areas. So that's how the breakdown is. So why we buy this? Because we are lazy. Not laziness as much as we love convenience. We're in a very fast-paced world, and walking all the way over in the corner to turn off a light is really wasting a good 10 seconds of my life, and I don't want to do that, so I'd rather log into my smartphone and do it. For right now, it's cool to be like, look what I did. But, in 5 years, it really is that. You mean I have to go over there and turn off that light? Oh, my gosh. Or go back in the house and make sure everything's turned off? No. One button, power down your home, which is kind of cool, but, might be a little bit risky. So controlling everything, including many, many, many devices in your home. I've covered that extensively. Again, I think, if you keep looking online on the online retailers and stuff, the things you see that'll pop up will be very surprising. Also to remotely control the devices and updates. So a lot of these small embedded devices actually can get firmware updates like we think of software updates. So those can be pushed up to them, so in case, the dimmer isn't exactly dimming correctly, it hops, it only turns on and off, they can push some sort of software firmware update, make it dim a little bit better. So instead of having to, like you take your car to get it maintenance, you have to actually bring it back in. In this case, wirelessly, it's able to push these sort of updates to them. And also, obviously getting them remote control, getting remote information, saying, hey, light, are you on? Because you don't know necessarily if the light's on. You have to keep asking the light itself. Are you on? What power setting are you at? Is there a sensor? Is it day? Is it night? Conserving power. Multiple user control is another cool thing. So you can, again, I use the household example because that makes sense. You've got the nuclear family. You've got 4 people in your home. They might get different levels of access to these Internet of Things devices. And that comes into place when you have the second 2 models, where you have a local controller or you have a cloud-based one. Because if you're talking directly to the device, you can't really have that role-based control. They really need to conserve power, which also comes into the wireless quite a bit, and why these technologies are becoming more predominant. Because a lot of these are devices that, in theory, the general terms is that 5 years. They're supposed to last on a wall for 5 years. And think about your thermostat at home. It's very similar, that's obviously something that they'd want to add. But your thermostat, may run off batteries, and you change that battery once a year maybe, or, whenever it starts going out. Or your carbon monoxide detector, same thing, right? You turn the battery every years. Well, if you had, say, 50 devices in your home that run on batteries and you have to go cycle through them every month or so, it becomes completely inconvenient. So we want to keep these as low power as possible. They perform their task, and the overhead of being online with the Internet of Things is a very little power overhead, which, brings me to several of the wireless technologies I'll talk about. And automating. You're not only directly interacting with the device, you can set the controller to, dim the lights at this time of night, or make sure that, the kids want to be online with their laptop, whatever, cut off the Internet at this hour. You have that control through these, services. So automating, making our life very convenient. So this is my, push, yay, Internet of Things, coolness. The big picture, devices, local controller. And this is kind of the breakdown of the Internet of Things level. The cloud has got the control server, the web application, update server, and some of the control devices. And then, of course, the user. So what are the practical fears we have if these devices, and we're going to focus mostly on, what's sitting in our home. Command and control of everything on the network. You can see all the camera feeds. You want to unlock a door or lock a door. Disable whatever alarms you might have at home. Send out distress calls. If you have control of the phone, or you can, call on the police every night. They kind of get ticked off at you, the boil-cod wolf sort of thing. Make toast. Or create poltergeist, And you can think where I'm going with that. It's like, if you can turn on and off the lights remotely, you can really freak people out, especially if they don't know you've installed this in your home. They're like, hold on, I'm gonna go take the garbage out real quick, walk outside the party, start dimming the lights or flickering off on and off really quickly. Also having hands come out of the TV would be, one step up, bow down to you if you can make that happen. But, these are things that we would worry about implementing them. This really is the end result concern of our physical world, and not like if the server gets broken into, what happens to my data. These are really physical concerns, which in a way is sort of a good, and this is an overall concept, is good for people that don't understand the importance of, having their data secure. They think, oh, my credit card's stolen. That's fine. We're bringing this sort of networking control into the physical realm. So when we start to see issues with these devices, all of a sudden it's like, my doors can be unlocked, my lights can be tampered with, people are watching me in my home with my camera feeds. Like, becomes, oh my gosh, this is a real world scenario. So in a way, this might help our industry, quite a bit overall, because it's bringing it into the real world. Alright, so that's all the Internet of Things generalization. I want to focus more on the attacks that are wireless-based. And some of these I'm going to be going over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which, we've talked about quite a bit, and then some new ones, Zigbee and Z-Wave. But these are general wireless attacks. Some of us have done wireless testing. Some of you guys are here because you've got these things installed in your house now and you're being a little paranoid. Paranoia is good. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So we scan for devices. We try to find what's around. With wireless, it's great because it's RF. It's sent out there. There's no good way to hide it. If you know the frequency, you can listen in and see something's going on. Some signal is being sent out, and you can do maybe triangulation to find them. But if we want to see what's in the realm, we follow the protocols and see, oh look, and from where I can scan right here on the podium, there's 5 devices I picked up. I might not know a lot about them, but I found them there. I know there are at least 5 in my approximate area. We can sniff the channels. You don't have to be on like the physical network now to sniff. With wireless, you monitor these frequencies, this little, bandwidth area, and the next step is to see if you can break that down into what's a protocol level, like bits. You pull out the bits and then you extrapolate that down. So potentially we could sniff it, and we don't have to be physically, near you to sniff the device. I can be sniffing, whatever's going on in here, I'll be in the other room, and I can monitor it. And the question is, can I extract the data that I want from it? I can inject onto the network, potentially. I can send mischievous packets. I can send denial of service packets, something that would interrupt. I can also do jamming so that I'm constantly saturating a channel, which is illegal and you should not do it. But it is something, I mean, the police officers sometimes do this. You see it in the movies. Oh, we're going to cut off all the cell phone signals. Well, that's how they do it. They just saturate the channels with data, or random data, or just, full on all the time. So don't jam. Replay attacks, if there's something that's being sent and we know it's a good packet, what happens if we keep sending it over and over and over again? Can we get different results? Can we get different data back? Decrypting traffic, obviously a big concern, especially with these physical access devices, where if I can decrypt it, maybe I can do the door unlock. And then again, denial of service. You don't have to jam a channel. The replay attacks and other things can also cause that. So if somebody's unlocked the door and they want to send the signal to lock the door back again, what happens if I jam the signal? They've pressed the button on their phone, they walk in and they just don't know, unless there's some sort of back-end alert that's been sent to them, that I've jammed it, so it doesn't matter that they've sent this signal. The device hasn't received it in the end. And so that's more of a design issue that should be considered, but it's not that difficult. The jamming is a very easy thing to do. It doesn't take, industrial equipment that the police and the government owns. It's actually a very simple thing. It just takes power and knowing the frequency. So that could be a major concern depending on how these things are set up. So wireless for embedded. We're looking at no keyboards again, no great way to interact with the device. So some things have to be preset by the factory out of the box. It needs its setup. It needs to know how to connect. We're looking in a world of mesh networking, and I won't go so much into that. That's more of a researchy term. But instead of necessarily having one central controller and everything talks to that like we're used to an access point doing, they might need to talk to each other. And so when I set up a sensor, it needs to somehow, know its environment very quickly. And that's difficult to do if it's about that big, and the only way I can talk with it is through a little button on the back. There's no way to directly interact out of the box. So we needed to consider that, like things using shared keys, the way that they would connect to each other initially. And also, again, I mentioned quite a bit about the power, frowny face. There's very little power given these devices. For anyone who's had their phone on all day and watched YouTube, how long does your phone last if you're watching constant movies on the internet through, 3G, 4G, whatever, or Wi-Fi? It drains your battery very, very quickly because these wireless technologies want to get lots of data through, and they're not really concerned about your power. So the massive amounts of data, we don't need that for a lot of these devices. So we can tone that down significantly. And the only way we could have this world work as it does with our current battery technology is to do that sort of thing. So a few of the top players in this game of wireless, the two big ones here are Zigbee and Z-Wave. And they are just what I talked about. They are the very, very low power wireless protocols. They're there so that you can send out a beacon every once in a while. Hey, what's your status? Well, I'm at 40% power. Good. Well, you don't need to pull that, 10,000 times a second, maybe once a second, just to check for an update. So a little beacon in, a little beacon out, and then the radio is turned off for time intervals. Saves enormous amounts of power. I don't have any specific graphs in my presentation, but trust me on that. So Zigbee and Z-Wave, you'll see more details a little later on. They're very similar in that. And then we also have our, more common technologies that we're used to. Obviously, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are still in the game because our phones have both. So if I want to connect to a controller, I can go over Wi-Fi. Or, if it's a device that's plugged in and getting as much power as it wants, I can directly connect over Bluetooth. And again, maybe to the hubs or other controllers, you would want to have that available. So a lot of devices are still coming with those, and those we'd consider ones that are, able to get as much power as they possibly want. And then, of course, there are many, many others. We've got NFC, which is RFID. We've got things like wireless HD. People that might have set up new TVs or projectors have seen that. You'll be able to stream your HD movies through this specific protocol. We're still using infrared, like what your remotes used to use. There's a lot of proprietary protocols out there. Because this is such a new area, there was a lot of them bubbling up to the top. And these two kind of made it, but there's a lot of other ones that are existing either in different countries or new people are trying to say, hey, no, I made this new one. Everybody should hop on board. So, I've got that slide later on. Let's talk a little about Wi-Fi. We're at a hacker conference. Wi-Fi is one of the first things a lot of us got into playing around with because it's hard to get caught. So what is Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi is 802.11. It's got 2 different frequencies it runs on. Again, this presentation is not going to be all about Wi-Fi hacking because that's been done quite a bit. But I want to do a comparison between all 4 technologies that I'm going to be focusing on so you kind of get their level of security. We've got between 11 megabits per second and 3 gigabits per second. The new AC standard actually theoretically in a vacuum in space in perfect time continuum blah 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 can get 3 gigabits a second. In practice there's no way. But if you're looking at a power scale and you'll see the amount of bytes that the other technologies can get a little later on, this is a massive power draw. If your phone is trying to download that quickly, it will probably be, I'd say, a fifth. It'll last a fifth as long. Your phone is maybe lasting the full day if you're lucky and you're doing stuff. So you're going to be recharging it. You're going to have a nice, slick little phone and a brick that's the size of your laptop to charge it throughout the day. That cracks me up. I love people having the slick, newest phone, and then you put it in their front pocket and their back pocket. It really has a power brick that big. And us being nerds in here, we've done that forever, and then we were made fun of, and now it's become socially acceptable, and I see why I was made fun of, because it's such a dumb thing. But that just gets me. So with that, you'd have to have that giant power pack for all the devices around your home. It'd look even weirder. Wi-Fi has several layers of encryption throughout the years. I won't go through all the changes. The current levels of encryption are good. There haven't been any specific attacks against the encryption levels of WPA. Theoretically, possibly, but right now, that's a pretty sound level. Obviously, we can go into the older versions of wireless. We're not. We still have lots of unsecured. I'll get to in a second. Another part of my talk that I'm going to focus on is the equipment that you can use at home to play around in all of these fields. And these are my personal recommendations. Some of them are still out there. Some of them are hard to find. I like devices, as my bag can tell you. I'm a big fan of keeping lots of devices on me and playing with new toys as they come out. So I've done a little bit of a survey here. A lot of these are not commercial grade. There are better commercial grade hardware to do these things, but these are the ones that either are available in the vendor area here or pretty easy to pick up for, I started this as a college student, so this was my college student budget is kind of where I try to get things at. So some cards to play around with that I have listed here, and I didn't list them specifically because there are a lot of really good ones. There's the TP-Link, I always forget them all, the WN722N. It's not dual band, but it's a lot of fun. I've got a Roswell card up here that does dual band really well, which is a little harder to find. But a couple of them up there, you can see people that have the Wi-Fi Pineapple is really cool. It's basically a wireless router that's really designed for Wi-Fi testing. You connect into it, it's got all the tools you want on there. There are other projects similar to that. You can do something with a Raspberry Pi. Wi-Fi is an easier one to find data on and not have to spend lots of money. Of course, we have the classic Alpha. So anybody who's done wireless hacking has heard of some of these. And most of them are under $50 for the cards themselves. If you've done Wi-Fi hacking old school, you're used to the old Orinoco gold card. So you remember PCMCIA slots on computers? That's what the little one in the bottom corner, that was the first, oh my gosh, we can hack wireless, what should we buy? That card was great. But that's 15 years old now, and so nobody should buy that. If your computer still has that on there, then sure. So what are some of the, why would you use Wi-Fi? In the embedded world, in the Internet of Things world, why use Wi-Fi? Well, we want to connect to the access point. Maybe our controller needs to connect to our actual access point to go to the cloud. So we need Wi-Fi for that. Those are plugged in. We need a lot of data to come through. Something like a CCTV. If you want to set up television or cameras in your home, either internal, external, whatever your reasons are, you can't get that amount of data through with good image quality with most of the other wireless technologies. They just don't have enough power and enough throughput to make it work. So having your little, pin camera might work, but you're not going to get the greatest signal ever. So some of the things might still be using it. You might have other devices that have existed for the last 10 years that you want to bring on board for this Internet of Things control. So maybe you want to be able to allow those to connect as well. So it's not necessarily just legacy. It is the highest power of the technologies. But, they're trying to push as far away from it as possible. So what are the current problems with Wi-Fi? We've got three main ones. Sniffing, obviously, if you're at Starbucks, if you don't know this, if you're at Starbucks and you connect in, you're connected over an unsecured network. Your traffic is not encrypted by that access point. When you set up your home router nowadays, by default, most of them force you to choose a secure method of, logging in. If you type in your credentials on a little connection thing, that's good. If you're typing it into a little web page, that's bad. So people that are sitting in these areas and sniffing this traffic and you're not encrypting, actual lower level protocols, they can extract your passwords. And I do this quite a bit for work only. But it is not, with any of these equipment that I showed you up here, that's doable. We have deauthentication, which is these three, well, two of these three are common across the board for wireless. But you can kick somebody off the network, have them reconnect, we can kick them off again, and just really to annoy them, or like I talked about before, keeping them from sending the signal through. And also we really want to avoid reavers. If you haven't played around with Reaver, it's a good tool. This one is more of a protocol issue with WPS, and it is installed in every home router, and sometimes when you uncheck the box, it doesn't matter. So within 24 hours, people can hack into most home routers. If that's news to you, then you're in the right place, and ask me or other people about it. It's really a sad turn of events, but it's really difficult to turn off. We don't find this in many corporate headquarters, but in your home access point, if you haven't reconfigured it, it's most likely somebody. I won't describe all how the attack works. It's basically brute forcing, but within about 24 hours, somebody can break into your home access point with no trouble, with an access point made in the last 5 years or so. And I'll have some Q&A at the end, and obviously be around at the con if you have any questions about that. There's a lot of very knowledgeable people about these two technologies here. So Bluetooth, just a little bit of background on me. I did a lot of research with Bluetooth. That was kind of my introduction to it. I've given several just full-length talks on Bluetooth itself. But today we're going to stick to the standards. Bluetooth has a low-energy option. The one that we're used to using is kind of a medium energy one. With the new standard, Bluetooth is becoming more Internet of Things friendly. So instead of having the 2-ish megabits per second, which takes a lot of power, there's a lot lower one. It's a technology people are familiar with, and it interconnects already. So it is still existing and might possibly become a runner-up or come from behind to dominate the wireless world of the IoT, but I doubt it. There's a lot of research. I saw a really cool talk at the Wireless Village at DEF CON. Big fan of the Wireless Village. A lot of the guys that put it on are here. It's very, it gets kind of looked over a lot of times at DEF CON. That's pretty much where I hang out quite a bit. A lot of really good talks in there, and it's a very, very small room. Very intimate, but there's some amazing stuff. And one of them I saw this year was specifically on the Bluetooth, some of the vulnerabilities in the lower end one. But as far as equipment you want to play around with, I suggest the UD100. It's nice because it has a little SMA antenna on there. Obviously, if you know anything about Bluetooth, the Ubertooth for sniffing and injection. These are not compatible with the newest standard. I don't know of what the best dongle is. Again, if you want to play around with this for Bluetooth 4.0, which is anything you would buy nowadays. But I've heard of just kind of across the board, get whatever you'd like. So this is the King of Denmark, and Bluetooth was named after him. That was actually his nickname. I have no idea how they linked those two together, but he was like the King of Denmark in the 1500s. So somebody was a history major and somehow got integrated with the Bluetooth project and decided, they drew that name out of the hat. This is an actual action figure of this 500-year dead King of Denmark, which seems awesome. Like, post 500 years, if they make an action figure of me, I would be super happy. So some of the issues with Bluetooth that have existed for quite a while, like Wi-Fi, you can have unauthenticated service. Actually, unlike Wi-Fi, you can have unauthenticated services. Difficult to say. So instead of having to, the Wi-Fi standard is like this big. It's about getting packet A wirelessly to, or device A from device A to device B. Bluetooth is much broader. It actually defines the service level stuff. So in Bluetooth, you can connect to a service without having to authenticate to the device. In theory, sometimes. It does work, but it depends on configuration. So I've been able to access certain services when the designers thought that you'd have to actually connect and authenticate to the device level versus just service. It's like going through a VPN, sort of. If you connect directly to the VPN, if it's like somehow unencrypted or not. HTTPS versus HTTP. You've got a secure connection and an unsecure one. If your Wi-Fi is open, then, it depends on how you're sniffing it or interacting. So anyway, that's a potential issue. We've got default pins. What's the default pin for everything for Bluetooth? 4 zeros. If you are now hackers. All of you, everyone in this room is now a hacker. If you try to connect to a Bluetooth device with 4 zeros, you will most likely get in. In the old school world. In the new school world, with the new standard, it's a little bit more different. They don't have necessarily defaults. The encryption happens a little differently. But with old things, and also because everybody's so familiar with it, that still pretty much works all the time. There's some, in the standard, for the new Bluetooth, in the old standard, there was the unencrypted, unsecured, it's like your Wi-Fi, you're just connecting to an open network. In the new one, they did all these advanced security things to pass keys and hashing, and then they had an option that's called Just Works, which is literally the same thing. It's my device wants to connect, my device wants to connect, done. Like you push buttons on both sides, there's no authentication, nothing, they just connect to one another. Most of the time that involves pushing a little button and then connecting on it, but sometimes if they're just out of the box or they reboot or power off and power on, you can connect, and there's no authentication process whatsoever. You have full access to all the services available. And I've done a lot with Bluetooth. There are so many Bluetooth devices and stacks and standards. I have been saying for years, I think there are a lot more issues that have been addressed in the implementations of things in all of our little devices. I think there's a lot of issues out there. The big craze was around 2004 and 5, and then since then people have stopped playing with it so much. But I'd like to see more people play in this realm. That's my little pitch on that. If you do, let me know. I'd love to hop on board whatever projects you're working on or give you, some advice. Unencrypted traffic. Bluetooth has the option to encrypt. You can authenticate without encrypting, but then you can encrypt the data as well. Their standards for encryption are again pretty good. And then I've come across this before. I've scanned devices and found that there's development services that were enabled for the developers when they were doing, their development and manufacturing, and they forgot to disable them. And that can mean normally a direct serial connection. So again, this is a little bit lower level for the embedded people here, but a direct serial connection to the device can be very, very bad. You can basically get full control of the device. And as I mentioned before, this most likely is a service level connection. So instead of having to authenticate to the entire device, you might be able to connect to it directly. I have come across this. I would like more people to tell me if they come across it so I can play around. But I've seen that in odd, very popular products. So those are the two we're pretty familiar with. Those are the general risks. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about those and try to speed through these. Zigbee versus Z-Wave. It's like beta versus VH and Blu-ray versus HD, so whichever one porn goes with will be the winner. Very, very low bitrate porn. This will be like ASCII porn. Zigbee. Zigbee is the one that we've had a lot of talks about, well not a whole lot, but it's been given more focus in the security community. It's been popular for longer. Both of them were founded around the same time, but it was more accepted in the US, so there's been a lot more security. I've seen about a dozen talks that have mentioned Zigbee. How many people are Arduino players in the field of Arduinos or embedded devices? A lot of people are familiar with Zigbee because they've been doing a lot of the homebrewing projects with building, these devices. It's referred to as XB. There's a little device, a little shield adapter. So sometimes people refer to this as XB because of that branding. There's two key versions. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that it's controlled by the Zigbee Alliance, as is Bluetooth, as is Wi-Fi. They all have their alliances. Those three, and it's mostly the big people involved, Intel, Microsoft, Apple, that want to make sure the standard kind of stays the same and they can all agree on it. So Zigbee is another one like that. It's an open standard. There are two key versions. There's Zigbee and Zigbee Pro. And Zigbee Pro was released much more recently and had a lot more security, and prior to that, with regular Zigbee, there was a lot of lapse. Some of the standards with Zigbee, it actually, worldwide here, it's going to work on the same frequencies as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth because they're open, nobody has to pay anything. You're getting 250 kilobits per second, which compared to our normal, 11 megabits per second over Wi-Fi, which is the minimum, that's pretty low. And this is, again, in a vacuum, in a perfect world. A lot of times this is the max, and they'll go a lot lower than that. You've got a range of, let's say, about this room in general. Because of power issues, again, the further you broadcast, the more power it's going to take. But there are relays and such. The encryption level, old version, no encryption at all. None. The new version has AES 128, which, again, we're all pretty familiar with. It's a pretty good encryption scheme. The equipment that you'd want to play around with, we've got the Atmel Raven flashed with Killer Bee firmware. The flashing equipment is crazy expensive, so ask around or ask me. I don't have the equipment to do it, but I know who does. It's specialized firmware. Like rattling going on that just shifted around. Talking about Poltergeist has made them angry at me. It can be flashed with some custom firmware that'll do your fun playing around stuff. We've got one that if you're familiar with Kismet, Dragorn put this together a few years ago this was kind of modded. This was designed for Zigbee hacking, but unfortunately he got busy with other things like the Black Phone and hasn't built a new version in a while. And then this one is probably where we're going to be going with it. It's the API mode. It's the sort of the follow-up to using this customized board, Zigbee hacking, lots of fun. That's at the Killer Bee project, which is, I know, hard to see on the slides here because I chose a poor color scheme. But those are some of the open source projects, and then you can also use the XB board itself for acting as a client. So the Killer Bee Suite is the best tool set that I've seen. It allows you to do a lot of playing around. You can do things like scan and associate, extract network keys and such, which I'll show you in a minute. It kind of gives you, like we have a lot of Wi-Fi tools you're familiar with. It's kind of tons of them out there. This is one suite that kind of incorporates almost everything you need to hack Zigbee. Good stuff. It is an ongoing project. So with Zigbee, how the encryption process works, again, this is probably the predominant wireless technology in the Internet of Things, is there are 3 keys. There's a master key, and the master key is embedded in the controller device. The main, we think of an access point level 1. It's the thing that sits in the middle of everything and is talking to all of them. So when they originally connect, it has this master key to use to generate lots of stuff. There's a link key, and that's how the little device that wants to join in for the first time says, oh, I would like to connect. Let me send you, this key. And it's like you logging into your access point at home for the first time. When you log in, you put in a password, then you mutual authenticate, and then it says, oh, okay, that device is authenticated to me. Same idea. And then there's a network key that gets sent. And this is for all the further joining. So it's like when you, instead of storing that access point key, there was another one generated based on the master key. You connected. It generates this new one, gives it to the little device, and says, from now on, you don't have to tell me this, link key / password anymore. You'll just connect directly to me using this network key that we've agreed upon. All the encryption stuff taking place in the background will work. We'll be able to talk to each other. That's great. Few issues with that. One of them is the standards. Standards can be fun. It's amazing to me how often people just read through old specs and are like, no way, and that's how the newest O-Day gets dropped, because it's literally in the spec, but nobody's bothered to read them because I have access to the Bluetooth. The new Bluetooth spec was 2,500 pages long. So just to give you an idea, they are thorough, but that's why people miss these for decades at a time, because they're very long, very boring, and lots of just little tables and stuff. So anyway, one of the standards for Zigbee to make things friendly is called the Home Automation Standard. And the reason it exists is we have many, many manufacturers that want their things to work together, all in unison. So I have, I'm the manufacturer, and I've made this central controller, but other manufacturers want to have their devices added to it. Well, how do we all know that we can talk to each other and the device that they have could go with another brand? So we want I'm a manufacturer, I've made this device, but I want it to work with all of the top 10 ones out there, the controllers. So I need to make something that's sort of universally friendly. So what they've done is they have this default key. And essentially, if it is home automation, and I'm guessing that outside of home automation, because it's easy, this will also be used. The breakdown is that any device that you have can connect to the network. So I could pretend to be the host and accept this key, or I can pretend to be a node of any type, use this key, and it says, oh, you have that super secret key that we've all shared with everybody. You can join onto my network. And this is in the standard. It's easy to implement on a device. So to make everything universally friendly, anything can connect to your home network when it's in a pairing mode. And that's the only catch here, is the devices aren't always in a mode that they want to accept new things. Generally, it's a setting in there. That's an implementation issue. They could, in theory, be set to always allow new devices on there. But if everybody's using the same key and there are multiple devices, then what happens? We could have it can connect to anything. And I'll talk about that a little more with Z-Wave. But it doesn't know exactly where to go, because it's like saying if you were at home and you wanted to connect to an access point, and you pick any access point and you all have the same password, and it would, Microsoft being super friendly and Windows will default to connect to whatever it's done before, you don't always know where you're getting internet from. If you live next to a Starbucks and you've connected to that access point before, it's the stronger signal, or maybe it's just haphazard. Which one you're actually on, you don't know. And that's the same idea here. It is because they're accepting the same key from any device, you're not sure which one you might be connecting to. As the small device, you could connect to this one or over there. This is a little bit more about it. It's basically suggesting that. Again, this is in the Zigbee standard. Another issue is that in the old version of Zigbee, you've got that super secret key, but then you generate this new key. So it doesn't matter, because afterwards I'm going to be using this new key. That new key is sent in clear text. Yay for the win! So all you have to do is sniff the channel, much like we used to do with Wi-Fi, and you can do with Bluetooth, and see that key go across. Now you can potentially, and this is a sub stuff I'm working on, emulate that device. I have that device's super secret key. So now I can pretend to be that device because I have that key that only they should have. The catch here is that this is only sent during the initial pairing. So you can either use deauthentication or just be sniffing at all times to see this key joined. And after that, you don't care what the HA key is. You can skip that entirely. You can connect directly here. This is stuff that I've used with the Z-Wave, or Zigbee, excuse me. Some other funs with the standard. The trusted central address is all null. The master key can be all null. The network key can be all null. So it's basically saying you could potentially generate all of this information because the default ones are zeros, all null. So you can generate these keys on your own prior to connecting. This is something I haven't been able to confirm, but it is in the standard. But it's allowing the lowest security level to not have any sort of keys involved at all during this process. On to Z-Wave. Z-Wave, again, released a little bit later. It's kind of coming up more and more. There's different reasons why one would be more beneficial than the other. Operates on a different range in different countries, but it's still within this kind of range that I have up here. A little bit lower throughput, but in most cases we really don't care. Shouldn't make a difference. Same range, and in theory uses AES 128. And in practice, I have no idea. It's still new, and as I said, they're developing it. It's not as predominant. So finding hacking stuff about it is difficult, and finding usability in Linux is actually very difficult right now. The Open Z-Wave project is a stack. The other thing I should explain about Z-Wave is it's proprietary. So in order to join up with the happy Z-Wave world, you have to sign things like NDAs. So there's got to be, the other standards are pretty open. This one's a little more difficult to play around with. However, there might or might not be things that people have posted accidentally that say, what was it? It was do not share or, private information, whatever. Their standards might or might not be leaked out online on different random Russian websites, German websites. If it was out there. I have a friend of a friend of a friend who did this thing. So some devices to play around with. The projects that we're going to do in the future, this should be the device that we use. Again, Zigbee has had some play around time. Z-Wave, not a whole lot. This device is firmware flashable. If you can see, I press a little button and it blinks. It's now the access point. It actually has a little power inside of it. So what you're doing is a new device would connect to this, and then you kind of have a serial level control. So unlike Wi-Fi that gives you a very low level access, this is actually the little hub, and then you're kind of communicating with the hub. which is kind of cool, and also because we can flash the firmware, we can do all this fun control stuff. But I'm very much, still playing around with the idea and how to do it because it is proprietary. Finding out information can be very difficult. There are a few other devices out there. One of them, the t215 is another very cheap device to play around with. Again, I'm throwing a lot of equipment and numbers in there out to you. Maybe look back at this later on if you're still interested. Who's your daddy? That is a big question with Zigbee or Z-Wave. It can't find its daddy most of the time. So how this works is that any device that the standards are even, I would say, less or different than Z-Wave or Zigbee in the fact that when I'm a new device and I want a pair, I will connect to anything that's out there. I have no idea what I'm connecting to. There's no HA key, there's no original keys, there's nothing that goes on. If you have two controllers sitting next to each other, listening for a device, and I turn my new device on, 50-50 shot. No idea. So if you're neighbors, and you went to the store at the same time and you're all setting up your devices, you will have a horrible, horrible time with Z-Wave. Or if you're an attacker and you're sitting in there with this device, which is very difficult to conceal, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for them to add new devices, all of a sudden it connects to me, I've got full control over it. Now, they don't have control, so they know something might be up, but if they're setting up 30 of these sensors and 3 of them are not working right, then obviously call IT and the gremlins in the machine. But you can possibly do that. It has no method of knowing that at all. On the flip side of that, it also has no concept of its owner. In the sense that there's normally a push button on there that says I need to accept new commands, and if you do that, a third-party controller, one that's not like the Z-Wave device connects to this hub. They're good friends, they're talking to each other, but if another hub comes into place and says, hey, you should disconnect, it'll go, okay. So it'll pop off right away. There is a caveat, it does have to be in the mode to accept that sort of commands, but I'm sure the implementation of those is going to go awry. Some model, some brand out there is just going to be able to be knocked off right away. So I'm wrapping up pretty quickly here. Building sort of a honeypot. This is a project that was out from last year, unlocking a certain brand of locks remotely. I was unable to confirm them. If anybody knows the guys who did that talk at Black Hat last year about unlocking locks wirelessly, let me know. I've had a difficult time getting a hold of them. I'm going to go through this really quickly. If I can wirelessly connect or control the network or pretend to be the network, then I can potentially issue new commands and push my own custom firmware to your device. I mentioned earlier on that software updates are possible through firmware. If I am the master of this network, if I control that, then when you're asking for new updates, I can push new firmware and then resell that on Craigslist. And so I'm sorry I looked at the time. I'm very close on the border there. So I thank you all very much for coming to this talk. Even though you missed out on some awesome HFC stuff, I forgive you. These are my creds, my Twitter handle and emails. I am on my time, so if you have any questions for me, I'll be over at the HFC booth. I'll be wandering around. Please do ask. And again, thanks for coming to DerbyCon.